Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Today we're talking about what lab tests you can do to understand general body health. Now I have other videos that are specific for brain, and another video that's specific for the general blood test, which is the complete blood count and the biochemistry profile and basic spot urine analysis. Today we're talking about more specific advanced tests that can be done for the general body, and they include some urine tests, some blood tests, a little bit of saliva or genetic tests, and perhaps a dental exam. So today I'd like to begin with the blood tests, and I think the most exciting one is the total bile acids. Total bile acids is an old test that's been around for a while. It was invented by the Mayo Clinic, and it was a test that was designed to measure the total bile acids circulating in blood produced by your liver and pancreas. And it was not very long-lived as a test for diagnosis because it's non-specific. But that's its great beauty. It's not specific for individual disease, so it doesn't help a doctor diagnose a condition or make a diagnosis code or prescribe a drug. However, what it does do is a very, very good marker for the general health trend of the liver. So as that total bile acid changes, the liver is either getting slightly healthier or less healthy from whatever you're doing. So it's a very good general bioassay of the health of the liver and the pancreas and the bile system. So that's total bile acids, and it's available through the major labs like LabCorp and Quest, which are the largest laboratories in the world, distributed everywhere. So it's a pretty standard blood test. The next one is the ESR test, or the erythrocyte sedimentation rate. And so that has to do with how red blood cells sediment or settle inside a tube. And so that one measures inflammation. It's a pretty good marker for inflammation and disease, and doctors use it to measure if someone's pretty sick. ESR, if it's off, tends to be a good indicator that there's something inflammatory and something that's wrong that needs medical attention. Another blood test that's very useful for the body to understand whether there's a brain problem or a heart problem or a blood problem is creatine phosphokinase. And creatine phosphokinase is a test that is an enzyme test. It's in your blood, and when it shows up, if it's high, the doctor would then order isoenzymes, which are the different kinds of enzymes. And there's different kinds of enzymes that tell you if one is elevated, it's more brain, and if another is elevated, it's more skeletal muscle damage. If one is elevated, it's more heart. And so you can determine which organ is involved by your doctor helping you get the isoenzymes, or the fractions of these different kinds of tests if they're elevated. Another test for you is an antibody test. You can do an antibody test for food. You can look for a food antibody test, which measures usually between 40 and 80 or 100 different foods, and you're measuring the specific antibodies against those foods. Those can be done as antibodies IgA and IgG and IgM and IgE. Those are different kinds of antibodies that can be measured, and they're all different. The classic allergy antibody screen is IgE. That's the one that allergists and immunologists recognize through the pathway of histamine as your general pathway for allergies. You can also do an antigen test for pollens that are in the air, airborne antigens. Things like tree pollen and grass pollen and dust mites and pet dander. Those things can all be a part of a different panel that's also an antibody panel to see if your immune system is attacking those kinds of things in your environment. There are antibody panels to self, and they're a little more expensive, and they have to be designed by your doctor, and they involve tests where you can look for antibodies to your cerebellum, or antibodies to your basal ganglia, or antibodies to your joints, or antibodies to your heart valves, antibodies to your ovaries or testes, antibodies to really anything in your body that you're looking for can help determine if you have an autoimmune disease or an early autoimmune reaction that isn't quite become autoimmune disease. We will talk a lot about autoimmune disease in other videos and have in the past. The next one is a series of urine tests. There are some urine tests that are really good for your body. There's one of my favorites that helps with arthritis is the oxalate test in urine. It's a test that measures oxalates, and that's very high in foods like spinach and almonds. And there's other foods too that are high in oxalates, but the general idea is if you have a lot of oxalates that are circulating in your body, it's very hard to tell oxalates clinically from gout or from actual osteoarthritis or from rheumatoid arthritis just based on your symptoms and your doctor examining you, because it feels the same. These oxalate crystals form in the joints, they form in the eyes, they form in the brain. They can cause all kinds of problems, and their biggest difficulty is kidney stones. They can form kidney stones, the most common form of kidney stones. and they can be produced by your diet, and they can be produced by your metabolism. And you can test for them in urine. Another thing that you can do is a toxicity screen. I like to use the Great Plains Laboratory or Mosaic Labs. They've got a urine tox test, which is a screening for a whole bunch of chemicals that are man-made in the environment. Those are pesticides and herbicides, organophosphates, and they include also some perchlorate, which is a chemical that's in dry cleaning. It may be in your environment, in your neighborhood. It may be also in your home. It's also a test. They've got a test in there that tests for several other chemicals like gasoline and some solvents. There is another test by them, which is a glyphosate test, and it's only for glyphosate. And glyphosate can cause all kinds of gut and brain problems. There's another urine test that I like a lot. It's called the Dutch Laboratory, and this one is a combination test of urine for sex hormones and adrenal hormones. And this is very useful for both men and women to understand the interplay between their adrenal hormones and their reproductive hormones. And that helps people understand if they're entering menopause or menopause. It helps them understand if they're dealing with a case of low cortisol or high cortisol during the morning or the afternoon. And it's very useful to understand the entire cholesterol pathway that determines the sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen and progesterone in all the genders. There is also a gene test, which is called the HLA-DQ2 and 8 test. This is a test that's done by usually a mouth swab that takes DNA from your mouth, and you send it to a laboratory, and it tests for the genes for the classical celiac disease, which is the sensitivity to gluten or wheat in your stomach and your small intestine, versus the sensitivity to it in your brain. And so that's the 2 versus 8 genes, DQ2 and DQ8, HLA-DQ2 and DQ8. There is also some tests that are stool tests for something that comes up that's very common called chronic pancreatitis. This is not acute pancreatitis, but chronic pancreatitis. And this is the stool fecal chymotrypsin and the fecal pancreatic elastase. These are 2 tests that can be tested for in stool, where you have to collect a stool sample, put it in a little container, and usually freeze it and ship it off to the lab. In some cases, you actually do it at a collection site, like where they take your blood. I also think that people should consider having a dental exam. If there's anything wrong with your heart, if there's anything wrong with your brain, if you have problems with dysbiosis in your gut, if you have problems with recurrent chronic infections, if you just don't feel good and you have brain fog, it's very useful to get a dental exam. Just have a dentist look at your teeth, examine your teeth, check the depths of your spaces in your teeth to see how many millimeters there are. This is very important for general health because you can get lots of infections from your own teeth and your own gums. That is our brief overview of the lab tests for general body health.